I think we are in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 32. Is that what you all have marked? Okay, and then mine breaks at 40, but then there's a little small section that includes 4 through 43. What is that what you guys have? So should we just go through 43? Okay. All right, Deuteronomy 4, verse 32 through 43. Would someone volunteer to read?
Y'all want me to read it again?
Sure.
Okay. Happy to do that. All right.
Thank you.
4:32. There is no other God. In all history, going back to the time when God created man upon the earth, search from one end of the heavens to the other to see if you can find anything like this. An entire nation heard the voice of God speaking to it from fire, as you did, and lived. Where else will you ever find another example of God's removing a nation from its slavery by sending terrible plagues, mighty miracles, war, and terror? Yet that is what the Lord your God did for you in Egypt, right before your very eyes. He did these things so you would realize that Jehovah is God and that there is no one else like him. He let you hear his voice instructing you from heaven, and he let you see his great pillar of fire upon the earth. You even heard his words from the center of the fire. It was because he loved your ancestors and chose to bless their descendants that he personally brought you out of Egypt with a great display of power. He drove away other nations greater by far than you and gave you their land as an inheritance as it is today. This is your wonderful thought for the day. Jehovah is God both in heaven and down here upon the earth, and there is no God other than him. You must obey these laws that I will tell you today, so that all will be well with you and your children, and so that you will live forever in the land the Lord your God is giving you. There's only like 3 more verses.
Yeah. Can you go ahead and do through 43?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Cities and refuge. Then Moses instructed the people of Israel to set apart 3 cities east of the Jordan River, where anyone who accidentally killed someone could flee for safety. These cities were Bezer on the plateau in the wilderness for the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead for the tribe of Gad, and Golan and Bashan for the tribe of Manasseh.
These cities of refuge, and the commentaries may get into it, but one of the places we visited when we were in Israel this last time was the altar with 4 corners. So if you accidentally killed somebody and their family was out to get you, you would run to these cities of refuge and you would hold on to the corner of the altar and they could not do anything to you. Yeah, it was very interesting, but the one that we went to visit was the only one known now. Like this altar was the only one, which I thought was interesting. My Bible has a little side note here. It says God's approach to establish a relationship with Israel at Sinai represents a significant moment in human history. Until Sinai, God's with S were considered territorially constrained and without obligation to people. However, God chose to deliver Israel from bondage in Egypt in a spectacular fashion in order to demonstrate his love for Israel so they might know God's magnificence over and above the gods of other nations. So the other gods demanded you killed something. It was about them. It wasn't about the people. And this God's coming in and he's like doing the opposite of what all these other gods were doing. As highlighted in other texts, the book of Deuteronomy was written to help Israel understand and remember God's power to deliver them, his sovereignty over heaven and earth, not a corner of the land. So I guess they would say like Pharaoh would be a god. Well, he was God over Egypt, but he wasn't God over, say, Rome. This God is God over everything, heaven and earth, and his love for them over other nations. Toward that end, Moses consistently reminded each generation of what God had done for their ancestors by calling them to remember the story of their deliverance. John 1 narrates another monumental moment in human history, one that is worthy of being consistently remembered: the incarnation, when God took on human flesh and dwelt, literally, the word tabernacled, among God's people. They were provided greater access to God through Jesus's public ministry. It is through Jesus that God has proven his power to deliver his people from the power of sin, shown us by his absolute love, and provided a way for all nations of the earth to have a relationship with the one true God. All right, Cindy, whenever you're ready, if you want to do John.
Okay, there's a sentence that's an overview of 4:32 to 40. This is a historical apologetic appealing for the nation's obedience to God's law. 4:32 to 39. Since the day that God created man on the earth, in all of human history, no other nation has had the privilege that Israel had of hearing God speak, as he did in giving the law at Mount Sinai, and surviving such an awesome experience. Nor had any other people been so blessed, chosen, and delivered from bondage by such mighty miracles as Israel saw. God did this to reveal to them that he alone is God. 4:37, his presence literally means his face. God himself had brought Israel out of Egypt. The Exodus resulted from the electing love that God had for the patriarchs and their descendants. 4:40, such gracious privilege, as remembered in verses 32 to 39, should elicit obedience, particularly in the view of the unconditional promise that the land will be theirs permanently, quote, for all time, as is detailed in chapters 29 and 30. The setting apart of 3 cities of refuge. These 3 verses are a narrative insertion at the end of Moses' speech. The setting aside of 3 cities on the east side of the Jordan River by Moses showed that Moses willingly obeyed the commandments God gave him. He was an example of the type of obedience that God was calling for. And that's it.
Back at the very beginning, it said this was an apologetic.
This is a historical apologetic appealing for the nation's obedience to God's law.
I wonder what's apologetic mean? A historic APO, a historical
APOLOGETIC. I don't APOLOGETIC.
What comes after that? A historical apologetic
appeal for the nation's obedience to God's law. I'm puzzled by apologetic.
What does that word mean?
Sorry.
You know, like they'll say, like something I read this morning said something about the apologetics. I think I'm going to look it up. For the nation's appeal for the nation's
obedience to God's law. But why would it be apologetic? He wouldn't be sorry for that.
Let me look the word up.
I got it, Chrissy. If you want to,
huh?
You want to hear?
I got it. You got it? Yes, please.
It's defense of faith. What is apologetics? Apologetics is quite literally defense of the faith. The Greek word apologia, I think I'm saying that right, means defense, as a lawyer gives at a trial. In every generation, people face the challenges, questions, and concerns about the gospel message of the Christian faith.
Well, that makes sense now.
defense of the Christian faith or defense
Yeah.
of the faith.
The
With
gospel
Moses, it would have been defense of their faith, not the
of
Christian.
the Christian, yeah, the message of the Christian faith.
So
So-
he was defending why they should believe what he was telling them to believe.
Yeah, and apologetics Wikipedia says it's defending religious doctrines throughout systematic argumentation and discourse.
Which is what
There's
he
more
was.
to it, but I think that kind of says it.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Then there's the 5 types of apologetics. Let me see
Oh,
if I can find that.
how long is that?
I was just looking at
I'm
that. and
looking.
It's a
Yeah.
lot of big words.
Yeah, there's like it looks like more people that did different things because they have a lot of names like classical apologetics,
Oh.
evidentialism, cumulative case method, presupposition.
Uh-huh.
I think I said that wrong.
More,
And
so more like types of apologetic.
Yeah, there's 5 different kinds. I honestly have no idea what any of those are.
Then if a statement is made, he was apologetic for his deeds. What would that mean then?
I would
If you,
think you're apologizing.
that's what I thought. But does it mean that you're defending whatever it was that you did?
According to this, it would be, but the word did they use apology? Or
Oh, here,
Apologetic.
Apologetic.
this
Oh,
kind
then
of, this kind of makes it more understandable to me. It says, what is apologetics? For some believers, apologetics has a questionable reputation. It amounts to intellectually bullying or argumentative one-upmanship. So you're defending by
Right.
intellectually bullying, like, well, my God can do this and your God didn't do that, and my God can, so that's, but it does, but apologetics doesn't seem to be the right word for that.
Yeah. So I think what Moses is doing here is he's saying, listen, here's my argument for why you need to be obedient to the Lord. You need to be obedient to the Lord because he did this for you. And remember, he did this for you and he did this for you.
Yeah.
And remember this and remember this and remember he gave you the 10 commandments and don't forget these things.
Yeah.
This is why you believe what you believe.
This is interesting too. There's 2 types of obedience: active and no, wait. Constructive obedience and destructive obedience. Constructive is such as following traffic safety laws, and destructive is such as a soldier shooting an unarmed civilians. I never really thought of there being 2 types of obedience like that.
Say that again.
There's constructive obedience and destructive obedience.
So constructive is obeying the law. And what's the other one?
There's law for our safety, like following traffic laws. And then there's destructive, which is when a soldier's being obedient and shooting at unarmed civilians.
That makes sense. It's like they have to do it because they have orders, but it's actually hurting. Wow.
I never thought there were 2 different types of obedience like that.
I had neither, Cindy.
All right, Kate, whenever you're ready.
Can you tell me how far you read? I had to take a phone call from the dentist and I wasn't sure where all you were reading to.
Oh, sure. Verses 32 through 43. While she's finding that, Julie, how did Donna make out of her appointment?
I haven't heard yet.
Okay.
Okay. This is the love of God. When you're raising small children, you use rewards and punishments to teach them to obey. But when they get older, you hope that character and love will motivate them to shun evil and do what's right. When Israel turned from the true and living God and began to worship idols, they were sinning against God's grace and love. The Lord hadn't chosen any other nation and given it his covenant, nor had he spoken to any other nation and given it his holy law. God had led his people and cared for them from the days of Abraham to the time of Moses, and he had done this for no other nation. Why? It wasn't because Israel deserved these blessings, but because of God's everlasting love. God doesn't want his children obeying him just to get blessings or to avoid chastening, but because they love him from the heart. The word heart is mentioned more than 40 times in Moses' speech, and the Shema emphasizes love for the Lord. Then it has also, I don't know if this is referring to the Shema, but it has other references in Deuteronomy to go to.
Is 6:4 one of them?
6, 4 to 5, and then it has 10, 12,
Wait, 10,
11, 10, 12.
chapter 10?
Yeah.
Oh, it says, and now Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, walk in his ways, to love him and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul.
Then it has 11, 1. And it's saying there, love the Lord your God and keep his commands.
You shall therefore love the Lord your God and keep his commands, his statutes, his rules, and his commandments always.
Would you go away?
No.
Sorry. Got a cat bothering me. Then it has 11, 13, and 22. And here again, it's saying obey the commands in 13 and in 22.
That's a pretty big deal. It's said so many times.
It's got
I want to make
13, 3.
a sign for my house. 13:3.
Yeah.
You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. 13, what was that? 13:3?
13, 3. Then it has 19, 9.
So the Shema's all over the place. 19:9.
Yeah.
Provided you are careful to keep all this commandment, which I command you today, by loving the Lord your God and by walking ever in his ways, then you shall add 3 other cities to these 3. Was that 19:9?
Yeah. And then it's got 36, 16, and 20.
36, 16, and 20? 16 through 20?
No, it's 30, chapter 30, verse 6, verse 16, and verse 20.
Verse 6 says, and the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. And then you say 20?
16 and then 20.
16 says, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, by keeping his commandments, his statutes, and his rules. And then 20, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, holding fast to him, for he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. I feel like we should make a sign for our houses that has this on it. Is that it?
Yep, that's it. Then it goes on to say, when Moses gave the law to the older
I
generation
think
at
Sue had
Sinai.
a question.
Oh, sorry.
What does it mean to circumcise your heart?
So like back in the day, they would circumcise the boys, and that would show
Mhm.
their commitment to the Lord. well, we're not required to do that anymore because it's our heart. We're not following laws and rules. It's our heart is that we love the Lord and we follow and obey because we love him.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. When Moses gave the law to the older generation at Sinai, the emphasis was on the fear of the Lord. And it has references to Exodus for that. But his application of the law to the new generation magnifies God's love for Israel and the importance of Israel loving the Lord. They were now to be a mature people who obeyed God from the heart. The Lord is a merciful God, but we shouldn't tempt him because he is also a jealous God. As evidence of God's love and mercy, Moses set apart 3 cities of refuge on the east side of the Jordan to which people who accidentally killed somebody could flee and get justice and find protection. This subject will be dealt with in detail in chapter 19, verses 1 to 14. And that's it through 43.
Yeah, mine's really short too. Any thoughts before I read mine? Okay, 32 through 40. Moses invited the Israelites, this is Tony Evans. Moses invited the Israelites to consider their circumstances. From the day God created mankind, had any other people experienced what Israel had? He asked. Had any other nation heard God's voice or been miraculously rescued by him? Never. Israel had been shown such amazing grace so that they would know that the Lord is God. There is no other. What should the knowledge of this unique and incomparable God drive his people of all times to do? To keep his statutes and commands so that we and our children after us may prosper. Verses 41 through 43. The cities of refuge were places where an Israelite who committed manslaughter could flee for protection until he could receive a trial. There were a total of 6 such cities throughout Israel, which we just read. I did read it, I think in 19, that one that you sent me to said about adding 3. 3 on the west side of the Jordan River and 3 on the east side. Since the people already occupied the land to the east of the Jordan, Moses set apart 3 cities there. Bezer, Bezer, which was in Reuben's territory. Ramoth, Ramoth, which is in Gad's territory. Oh. And Golan, as in like maybe Golan Heights. Golan in Manasseh's territory. That's it for mine, but I do want to write those cities down. Anybody else have notes that they want to share?
I thought this was kind of ironic in my concordance. You know, my concordance is different. It's more like
Yeah,
that's
application.
today. The very first verse, 32, says, "How tempted are we to look everywhere else but to God for our guidance and leadership? We trust medical doctors, financial advisors, and news commentators. But do we trust God? Get God's advice first and recognize his authority over every dimension of life." That kind of holds true this day and age.
For sure.
Christy, those cities you mentioned, they're not the ones that were actually in the Bible, were they?
Yes, these were territories that were already set up.
Oh, you go away.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, it says that these were, it said, since the people already occupied the land in the east of the Jordan, Moses set apart 3 cities there. Bezer, Bezer, was in Reuben's territory. Ramoth, Ramoth, was in Gad's territory. And Golan, Golan, in Manasseh's territory, which we'll probably learn more about that when we get to chapter 19, I'm guessing.
Oh, okay. I thought they sounded different when you read them out of Tony, but I see them here.
Oh, yeah, right there they are. We read them. I wrote them again. Yeah, that shows you how quickly I forget. Any other thoughts or things you want to share? This next section. Oh, it's pretty short. Do you guys want to try and get through it? Kim, do you want to read that 44 through 49?
Okay. Principles for Godly Living, Moses's second address. And there's a little paragraph I'll start with. After reviewing the history of Israel's journey, Moses recounts the 10 Commandments and the other laws given to the Israelites at Mount Sinai. He urges them to obey the law and reminds them of the consequences of disobeying God's laws. The 10 Commandments and all of God's laws point out to us where we fall short and show us how we should act as God's people. 44. Listed below are the laws Moses issued to the people of Israel when they left Egypt and as they were camped east of the Jordan River near the city of Beth Peor. This was the land formerly occupied by the Amorites under King Sihon, whose capital was Heshbon. He and his people were destroyed by Moses and the Israelis. Israel conquered his land and that of King Og of Bashan. They were 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan. Israel also conquered all the area from Aror at the edge of the Arnon River Valley to Mount Sirion, or Mount Hermon, as it is sometimes called, and all the Araba east of the Jordan River over to the Dead Sea, below the slopes of Mount Pisgah.
Very good. Cindy, whenever you're ready.
The heart of Deuteronomy is found in this long second speech of Moses. Now, this is the law, in quotes, which Moses explained to Israel. After a brief introduction, Moses gave the people a clear understanding of what the law directed concerning their relationship with the Lord in the land. Then Moses concluded by recounting the blessings or the curses which would come upon the nation as a consequence of their response to the stipulations of this law. 445, testimonies, statutes, judgments. God's instruction to Israel was set forth in 1, the testimonies, the basic covenant stipulations. 2, statutes, words that were inscribed and therefore fixed. And 3, judgments, the decisions made by a judge on the merits of the situation. This law was given to Israel when they came out of Egypt. Moses is not giving further law. He is now explaining what has already been given. 448, Mount Sinai. This reference to Mount Hermon is not to be confused with Mount Zion in Jerusalem. That's it.
That's it. Did it say at the beginning this is his second speech? Because Stan said he gave like 5 sermons.
It says the long second speech of Moses.
So the first one was, I'm assuming, the one above.
The
Lord-
first one started in the first chapter.
Okay, so not at 32.
No, start at 1.
Okay. All right, Kathy, if you're ready. Can you do it with your kitty sitting on your lap like that?
Yeah, well, he's gonna have to go. Trying to figure out exactly where this is going. It starts out saying 4 verse 44 to 5:33.
Yeah, mine says 44 to 5 too, so it must be an introduction to the Ten Commandments. But then
Yeah,
mine breaks it. Mine's gonna be very, very short, actually.
and then it goes to verse 6 to 21. So I'm assuming that's in verse 5 since we're already. So I'll just read this one section here, see where it takes us. The archaeologist Spade has revealed that the book of Deuteronomy follows a literary pattern used in the ancient Near East for treaties between rulers and their vassal nations.
Well, that's
With Israel,
interesting. I'm sorry, could you say that again? I want to write it down. It
Yeah.
follows, Deuteronomy follows
a literary pattern
a literary pattern
used in the ancient
okay.
Near East for treaties
Okay.
between rulers and their vassal, VASSAL, nations.
VASSAL nations.
Yeah. With Israel, of course, the Lord had conquered their enemies and set the Jews free, and they were his special people. But as they entered their land, this freedom involved responsibilities. They were a covenant people, and Deuteronomy defines the terms of the covenant. Like the ancient vassal treaties, Deuteronomy has a preamble, and that's chapter 1, verses 1 to 5. And a review of.
What did they call them? Ancient what treaties? Ancient Bassett?
Vassal, VASSAL.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, gotcha.
What did you say chapter 1 was? You just said, like, whatever it was you just read.
The Deuteronomy has a preamble, and that is chapter 1, verses 1 to 5.
Okay.
And then a review of the history behind the treaty is chapter 1, verse 6 to chapter 4, verse 49.
So preamble is what? Like an overview?
Yeah, like I don't know how to explain it. Like there's a preamble, I think, to the Constitution. So it's something before, I guess it's actually spelled out. Like I don't know if speech is the right word.
Because it goes on in there to talk about how he defeated Sihon the king and Og the king, which then goes on to tell us details. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Then it lists the ruler's stipulations for the conduct of his subjects, and that's chapters 5 to 26. And then what would happen if they disobeyed, chapters 27 to 30.
It's
It
the contract.
closes. What's that?
It's the marriage contract.
Mm-hmm. It closes with an explanation of how the treaty would operate in future generations, chapters 31 to 34. Moses began by calling Israel to hear God's covenant, learn it, and do whatever it commanded. That's chapter 5, verse 1. And as we have seen, to hear means much more than to listen casually to the words that somebody is speaking. It means to listen attentively, to understand, to heed, and obey. When God made this covenant, it included every generation of the nation of Israel from that day on, and not just with the generation that gathered at Sinai. Moses was addressing a new generation, and yet he said, "The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb." Verse 2. Just as God's covenant with Abraham included the Jewish people of future generations, so did his covenant at Sinai, for God was their dwelling place in all generations. Psalm 91. Most of the people who had been at Sinai died during the wilderness wanderings, but the covenant of God stood fast. Moses was the mediator between Jehovah and Israel because the people were afraid to hear the voice of God. And it's got references to Deuteronomy, Exodus, and Galatians. If we are believing and obedient people, hearing God's voice means blessing and encouragement. But if our hearts are not right with God, his voice could mean judgment. That's it.
Mine's very, very short. I love that. Learn and do. Okay, so mine says 4:44 through 5:2. After summarizing Israel's history departing Egypt, Moses began to explain the covenant obligations that Israel owed the Lord. In this long section that comprises most of the book of Deuteronomy, which is 4:44 through 26:19, Moses reviewed for the new generation God's laws and commands. They were to learn and follow these statutes and ordinances that Israel had received. Notice the imperatives: learn and follow. Bible study is good and necessary, but if you get no further than acquiring an intellectual knowledge of the Bible, you haven't gone far enough. A football team might have an expert understanding of the rules of the game, but if the coach and the players fail to put these rules into practice, the only thing they will obtain will be a long losing record. Or will be a losing record. This just reminds me, like Stan says all the time, like when people say, well, someone's a Christian, he's like, there's got to be action that goes with that. You just can't say I'm a Christian and have no action. There's got to be evidence that you are a Christian. And I think that goes with this. Like, once you learn, then you have a responsibility to apply it and live that life. And you're representing him. Any other thoughts? No, we will be here Wednesday, by the way. I don't know. I think we talked about that maybe. We were debating about going to the funeral or not, but I'm going to be here. So we will have Bible study on Wednesday.
I won't be here tomorrow. It's our last trip to Kenny's appointment with the VA.
Well, you're going to miss out on all the good stuff.
Oh, no, it's the 10 Commandments. Dang it.
One of the biggest events in history, but whatever. No, so all right, if nobody has anything more, this will conclude the reading of God's word for today. We'll pick up at chapter 5 tomorrow. Lori, I mean, I'm sure you don't know what happens with the 10 Commandments, so I'd be happy to do an overview with you once you get home.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
You're welcome. All right, ladies, have a good day. I'm going to stop recording.